The U.S. Supreme Court has extended the temporary pause placed on restrictions to the abortion pill, Mifepristone, there until this Friday. Justice Samuel Alito wrote the pause will continue until Friday, the 21st at 11:59 p.m. on the East Coast. Of course, following this very big news here on Live Now from Fox, we want to continue to cover it very closely. We're going to bring in a former federal prosecutor here, Katie Cherkosky. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And certainly kind of big news, a temporary stay. Give us, in layman's terms, what does this mean from the Supreme Court today?
Well, it's a very complicated issue. So basically what the Supreme Court is deciding is really an interim issue of whether they should allow the abortion pill to be available as it was while this case is pending through the lower courts. So the issue before the Supreme Court right now is not that they're ruling on the merits of the long-term availability of the abortion pill, but in the interim, while the litigation at the lower courts is still ongoing, whether that pill is available, essentially.
It is very, very interesting because they made a rapid decision, or tried to make a rapid decision on this. Maybe how rare is that, and how much of a maybe timetable does this that they couldn't make it today? Is that something that maybe they couldn't make it today, so they're giving themselves more time to debate it? What's kind of going on over the next couple days?
I think that the Supreme Court, they must have anticipated that this issue would arise when they overturned Roe, because this was the obvious outstanding elephant in the room, was the mail ordering of abortion pills and the interstate commerce involved with that. So I think that the Supreme Court has to decide first whether they're actually going to rule on this just as a temporary stay while the case is at the lower courts, or whether they actually jump to making a decision on the merits, as the DOJ and Biden administration has asked them to do, and make a final decision once and for all before it even gets to a final judgment at the lower Fifth Circuit level. So essentially, the question is, will this pill be allowed to continue its use as has been previously allowed before this challenge was brought in Texas, which essentially limits the use of the pill to what was originally approved back in 2000 and does not account for some of the changes that the FDA made over the years that made the pill more accessible and had less restrictive kind of prerequisites to access it for some folks.
And I do have to ask you, because obviously they will make this decision in the next few days. They put a deadline on it once more. What kind of decision can they make? Will they have to maybe rule with the Texas, or will they kind of decide against that? Or can it be kind of somewhere in the middle like the appeals court did? Mm-hmm. Or is it on one way or the other?
Well, they kind of have three options from my perspective. So they could agree that the stay needs to remain in place, and by that stay, I'm referring to the fact that the abortion pill could only be used for the purposes that it was originally approved for back in 2000, which would require only up to 7 weeks of gestation, 3 in-person office visits that cannot be dispensed through the mail, and things of this sort. So it's pretty restrictive as stands, and the Supreme Court could agree that they'll allow the stay in place while the Fifth Circuit continues to look at the case. They could decide that they're going to remove the stay altogether and allow the pill to be in the marketplace, as was the case before these court cases got involved with it. And only when there's a final decision from the lower court would they actually review at that point. Or they could, like I mentioned, make it a judgment on the merits and decide whether or not this pill is in fact in compliance with the law, as the plaintiffs allege that it's not.
It is very interesting because, like you said, and there's a lot of confusing different details, especially with the initial ruling out of Texas, the new appeal coming in place. Maybe how do people keep up with all of this news? Because for people that are following it very closely, it's still confusing to them. How maybe did they tell the public about all of these new details?
I think for practical purposes, if you're in a state that's already outlawed abortion or access to abortion, for the most part, that's not going to change much. What the significance is in other states where abortion has not been outlawed and is still accessible. And so how this plays into what happens nationwide is really the big question. And as we know, when Supreme Court overturned Roe, they said that they were going to get out of the abortion business. Essentially, they were going to leave all of the abortion decisions to the state and to the legislators that were involved with that, and to the people to vote for how they wanted things to be in that respect. But now here they're looking at an abortion case again, but it's slightly different because they're looking really at a federal agency and the authority that they had to approve this pill and approve it in the ways that it's now currently available. So I don't know that there's an easy answer. It's a very fluid legal situation, and things could change on a moment's notice depending on what the Supreme Court does. And so certainly I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are very concerned that this could be an automatic end to any access, even in states outside of those that banned abortion.
Correct. And you mentioned the Roe decision to overturn that within the last year, which is kind of crazy to think that it hasn't even been a year since that took place. When you look at that and kind of in that spectrum, the fact that Roe was overturned, does it mean it may be more likely that this stay is eliminated and that they go back to the Texas decision? Or maybe is it just dependent? Does that have no influence at all?
The legal analysis for the court is very different from what they were looking at in Roe. Yes, they're both abortion decisions in a sense, but when you're looking at what happened in the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe, that was simply the court saying that the Constitution did not allow for the Supreme Court to be involved in matters that should be left to the states. So that was where they left it off, that it was going to be something that was not legislated federally, in terms of availability of abortions at the state level. When you have this challenge now to the pill, the challenge is really framed as a challenge to a federal agency's approval of a medication. And there is an allowance in the law for folks to challenge the FDA's approval of something. But the bigger question is whether the Supreme Court actually makes a decision to override the FDA's approval of something that's been previously in the market, or they defer to the federal agency. And in the past, in other cases, even with the FDA, the Supreme Court has suggested that they should not be involved in overriding their federal agency's decisions, as those are kind of like the subject matter experts in that area. So for some people, they think that maybe the court has painted themselves into a corner by overturning Roe, and now here they are again to limit abortion in some other respect. But it's really a completely different legal analysis, and I think that based on some of the precedent that I've read, they may actually be able to walk that line and not override this the FDA approval, because that would be consistent with what's been seen in the past. But again, if there's any question about whether the FDA actually complied with their own regulations and law in passing the approval for this drug, perhaps they'll step in and agree. I mean, it's really hard to say, but it's completely different than what they did in the Dobbs case.
Definitely. It is a very interesting case. And like you said, the precedent, certainly they will have to look at that very closely. And of course, we know we have a deadline coming up in 24 or 48 hours and Friday night at midnight, almost exactly there on the East Coast. Could they extend the stay one more time to even think about it further, or is that out of the realm of possibilities as well?
I think that they can. And I think what they're doing, they have to review all the filings, and there's been some other briefs that were filed, from my understanding, just last night. So in terms of making a decision, and again, this is probably not a decision on the merits, but anything that they say in regards to whether they're going to uphold the stay or not will telegraph likely a decision on the merits in the future. So I think that they have a lot to consider. And I mean, the Supreme Court can basically do whatever it wants in terms of fashioning a decision in this regard. And it could be any or all of these things that we're talking about, allowing some of this to go forward, allowing none of it to go forward, or waiting for the case to just come up through the natural course of litigation. I would imagine that they're expeditiously working to get an answer, and that they are reviewing the filings and the briefings of the parties at this point still. So I really don't have a good feeling for what they'll do in the interim, but I would imagine that they would probably allow the stay in place while the case continues.
Correct. Yeah, there's a lot of different lawsuits in the legal facets to this overall, just overall what we're talking about here. Katie Cherkosky, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. Any parting words, anything you want to leave with our audience before I let you go?
I think that this, like I said earlier, this situation is very fluid. It can change at a moment's notice, and the Supreme Court does have all of the authority in that respect. Even though they said that they were going to leave this issue to the states, this was kind of one of these very specific federal issues that is back with them again less than a year after Roe was overturned. So it's again in their court, and I think Friday they will have a decision. I know they know that the nation is waiting for that.
I think a lot of people, millions of Americans, are patiently waiting on that decision. Thank you again for joining us and providing some context and perspective here on a very important issue for so many Americans. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. As we continue on here on Live Now from Fox, another look at the Supreme Court right there. A decision hopefully coming in the next 48 or so hours. Here is a tweet just to give you a little bit of an update on what we're talking about. The U.S. Supreme Court extended the temporary pause placed on the restrictions to abortion pill Mifepristone until Friday. Justice Samuel Alito wrote that pause would continue until Friday at 11:59 p.m.